Hi, welcome to the podcast, Wellness 3.0 Unlocked. Today's guest is Kerry Hughes, a globally recognized ethnobotanist and botanicals expert with over 30 years of experience at the intersection of plant science, health, and innovation. Kerry has spent her career exploring how plants can support human health, working across functional medicine, sustainable sourcing, and product development. She's also at the forefront of rethinking how botanicals are brought to market, developing a new model that not only prioritizes efficacy, but also protects biodiversity and supports regenerative ecosystems. Her work bridges ancient plant wisdom with modern science, and today she's helping lead a shift towards a more system-based thinking in health, agriculture, and global supply chains. In this episode, we're going to explore how this system thinking and complexity science are reshaping wellness, the powerful role botanicals can play in functional medicine, and how innovation in this space can actually help preserve the planet. Welcome to the podcast, Kerry. Super excited to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So start off just by telling everyone a little bit about your company and then also the journey that you took to get where you are now.
Oh, that's a big story.
Yeah.
So my company is called EthnoPharm, and that's based on the fact that I'm an ethnobotanist, and there's a field out there called ethnopharmacology, which is dealing with basically how cultures or how people use plants kind of globally. And so my company is focused on product and market development and brand partnerships in bringing new plants and plant products to market.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know, you asked me how I got here. That's a bigger story. So depends on how far back you want to look. But when I first started my journey into, when I was in college, I thought I might want to be a doctor, actually. And so I was pre-med, and they told me, you have to take a year of botany. And I said, that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I even tried to get out of it. But then I ended up taking the year of botany. And by the end of that year, I just completely fell in love with botany and plants. And I was like, oh no, I don't know what I'm going to do now, but it's got to have to do with plants. And I was certain of that. And then another close friend of mine said, have you heard of a field called ethnobotany? And of course I hadn't. There's not very many ethnobotanists around. So when I looked into it, I thought, oh, this is actually exactly what is interesting to me. It really brings together the interest in plants with medicine, with science, chemistry, and all the things that I was interested in. And so I really kind of carved my path that way. And I did an even kind of stranger thing at the time. So this is in the 90s. The university I went to was Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and they didn't have an ethnobotany degree. And so I told them, I want to get a graduate degree here, but I want to do it in ethnobotany. And I approached the soil science department, which is in agriculture, right? But It made sense to my mind because, soils are very important in agriculture. And a lot of kind of the really interesting ethnobotany is happening in these really biodiverse environments. At the time, at least, that was on my mind. That was what everybody thought. It was like, oh, ethnobotany, so you think of the jungle, and so there's this kind of agroforestry and soils tie-in. And so they said, well, if you design the curriculum and you get a advisory committee to, agree to it, then we'll allow you to do that. And so that's what I did.
Wow, you created a whole new graduate. Now, not to go off track too much, but have other students then followed in your footsteps?
I have no idea. Probably not, because it's really, it's a special kind of mixture of things. And also I have to say it's pretty funny because, so Cal Poly is one of the, leaders in soil science. And that's why I chose that department, because they're like one of the two top in the world, really. So it was like Cornell and them are the two top, and it was the soil science department that I had approached. And at the time, though, I was really embarrassed when I graduated, because I was like, well, I know a lot about soils, but nobody, that sounded really weird at the time. But now everybody wants to talk soils, and I'm finally like, okay, there's a reason for that. And I even kind of slid it off my resume, like, you don't need to know about this thing that I know about, And so it's funny that now that I'm working a lot with regenerative agriculture, those soils kind of background is getting used heavily. So, so yeah, it's kind of a funny thing I did, but there's definitely lots of people in, related fields or like those pure fields that are, from the university, but not that many in ethnobotany. And in fact, it's kind of sad because I don't know, I've been posting a lot and stuff in my content about how really just classical botany, and just botany in general, even in the natural products industry, is really getting ignored, and it's kind of not getting the attention that it really deserves.
And so explain to our audience the difference between botany and then ethnobotany.
Well, so ethnobotany is really simply just studying the relationship between humans and plants. And if you think about that, it's a pretty profound relationship we have because, well, plants have been here for so much longer than we have, for billions of years, right? So they were here for about 4 billion years doing photosynthesis and making the atmosphere so that we had oxygen to breathe, when we came along. And so everything that we are biologically evolved according to them, really. And that's what makes them really our perfect pharmacopoeia, because they have these, a lot of people call them secondary compounds. I have a colleague who said, I don't like the word secondary. So they're not secondary by any means. But it really means they're just not involved in like the primary metabolism of the plant, like the usual, making of energy and growth and reproduction, that kind of thing. It's they're, plant compounds are used more like in defense and signaling. And even what we kind of think of now these days is like, this is kind of like a language plants are using, right? And, as a human, a lot of us have, well, not only do we have, like they call it plant blindness, where it's like you look at the world of plants, you might look at a forest or something like that, and it's just green. It's like a green carpet. You don't see the individuals. It's because you don't have a relationship, right, with the plants to be able to like identify and see an individual there and to understand what those individuals are, right? So us humans have this tendency of like kind of grouping them all in one bucket, like the green bucket. And we think, gosh, these organisms, we think of them a lot of times as like lower organisms and think, they're kind of weird, right? They just kind of stand there. They don't do very much, People think of them as, lesser than, but actually they're able to do that because they've traded, behaviors like, they can't run away, things like that, but they make us come to them or us stay away from them because of the signals that they produce, right? And these are the secondary compounds that happen to also be the medicinal compounds in the plants that are then mirrored in our biology, that are useful in our pharmacology and the drugs that we develop or the nutrition that we need in order to live a healthy lifestyle.
So many interesting things just came up to me while you were going through that. So let's tackle it one at a time. First, because you were just talking about, from a pharmacological perspective, and like, let's talk about plants in functional medicine and pharmacology, and maybe a few things that are really common that people may be aware of, or some things that are really important and potent that people may not be aware of are actually plant-based.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited about the whole kind of sector of functional medicine. I also have a background in functional nutrition. And if you don't know, there is this whole kind of sector of medicine where even like mainstream doctors are using kind of a different way of looking at the body and looking at health and wellness, and oftentimes using very specialized kind of innovative labs to understand that. And it's really very systems thinking oriented. And then the things that they use are very rarely is it, pharmaceuticals, but the interventions are lifestyle and also supplementation and nutrition. And they're getting really good results with this. And so to kind of zoom out, a little bit, a lot of people are obviously familiar with pharmaceuticals. Depending on who you talk to, about 40 to 60% of our pharmaceuticals were either derived from or inspired by originally like plant compounds or, bacterial compounds. And so the majority of them really. And that kind of science that was used to develop pharmaceuticals, a lot of times we think of it as kind of, pharmaceuticals like a silver bullet, right? Like it's you're trying to cure kind of one thing where there's one receptor, one action. It's very kind of, you get narrow, more narrow to understand things. And that's reductionistic thinking. And it's really useful. And we use it every day in science, right? But there's been this whole kind of other evolving fields happening of systems thinking and now also complexity science, where it's like, well, that's really not the way everything works, right? Like when you look at nature, there's a lot of complex interactions that are happening there, and it's pretty mind blowing. It's hard to understand and hard to study scientifically. But now our models are thinking, and our models are starting to evolve to be able to do that more. And that's actually part of where AI comes in, is to be able to give us this understanding of how this complexity can interact and to be able to understand and kind of predict that better. So a lot of, I think, developments will come from that for health and wellness in the future.
Yeah, so many of these things don't operate in a silo, and just treating the symptom of something in that sort of perspective is missing potentially the bigger picture to actually figuring out the basis of what's wrong instead of just masking the symptoms.
Right.
So
So
obviously plants have been around way much longer than, the big pharmaceutical companies. And I think that initially there was a big push away from them recognizing some of the importance of the plants. But do you feel like they're starting to come back around? Or is there still a lot of pushback because it's not something that they can create in the lab? Or are they understanding maybe there's a beautiful intersection between utilizing those things and something that they can expand upon?
yeah, I mean, traditional pharma, like mainstream pharma, isn't so focused on plants. There is still some innovation happening there, but the innovation, a lot of times when they do find something that's from a plant, they will then, bring it down to one compound or synthesize it, and maybe synthesize it so they change it so it's patentable. And so,
Mm,
it's not usually exactly what you're finding in nature. And the beauty really of plants for medicine, I think, is, and really the expanding frontier from where we are, is the complexity of them and the fact that they have hundreds, thousands sometimes of these bioactive compounds that are affecting the body in kind of a complex way, affecting many different tissues all at the same time. And this is kind of
mhm,
where functional medicine comes in. We mentioned that topic, and you mentioned symptoms, right? It's kind of a cliche, but a lot of people think of mainstream medicine as kind of this symptom-based medicine, right? Whereas functional medicine is more getting to the root cause. And what they mean by saying that is that functional medicine is looking at, all these contributors to health and wellness. And a lot of times they tend to be more what they're called upstream areas of health. So they digest hormones, stress. So they're things that are like affecting the body first. And then
mhm,
from there, you can see the metabolic cascades happening and the dysfunction that happens when there's dysfunction up high in this higher area of, upstream area of health, than the lower stream kind of dysfunctions happen, and that's disease. And so if you are able to affect these upstream areas of health, a lot of times the body will just simply heal itself. It knows how to
mhm,
do that. If you take away the stressors that are bothering it and take away some of the dysfunction that may be happening in the upstream areas of digestion and microbiome, hormone production, all those areas. And that's where those functional labs come in to help look at those areas. And actually, also, you're probably hearing a lot more about, these wearables. And
mhm.
I know you're very into AI, and yeah, there you go. I have that too. And so people are getting really a lot of data.
Hey, and I
Yeah,
don't ever wanna disappointed if I don't sleep well. I'm like, "Oh, I gotta go to sleep. I don't want my alarm ring to tell me
exactly.
tomorrow." Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a lot of data that's coming in from these wearables, and they are from these upstream areas of health.
Mhm,
Sleep is very important, And so there's so much data coming from these wearables that's where the AI comes in, that, we can start predicting things and start understanding, like, where's the best intervention here? What's really going wrong for this person a
mhm.
lot of times. And it's a really exciting time, and I think that the longevity movement right now, which is very hot, very popular, is going to see a lot of traction in that with the
Yeah,
wearables. And a lot of people are like, what is longevity anyways? But it's really this stuff, and it is because now we have new science and new ways of thinking and new ways of doing interventions that really don't even take pharmaceuticals a lot of times. They,
mhm,
just through lifestyle change or the right kind of nutrition change or microbiome change, people can really drastically change their health.
Yeah, kind of just getting back to the way we were living in a lot of ways a few hundred years ago, you know, e
Well,
eating the
except that we have less infectious disease, and
yeah,
that's kind of back talking about those
yes,
pharmaceuticals. That's what they've done for us, that's been really
yes,
good, got rid of a lot of the infectious disease, and now what we're dealing with mainly is
mm,
chronic conditions,
that's right.
chronic disease. That's the thing that really plagues us now the
Mhm.
most heavily, and that's where all this functional medicine and wearables and interventions can really make a big difference.
You mentioned something a little bit ago, and I did wanna touch back on that when you were talking about soil and how it felt like such an odd thing for you to be interested in at the time, but how important that is now, and people are realizing the quality of our soil and how that has a dramatic impact on really everything and just even the nutritional value, like the red pepper that we're eating now doesn't have the same nutritional value that the red pepper that our grandmother ate, and the downstream effect that that has on all that, and the whole regenerative farming movement, which is coming out from that. So, what is it that you're maybe seeing that you're excited about when it comes to that
Oh,
particular?
well, I'm very excited about regenerative agriculture. So let's see, where do I start? First of all, I've been involved with the development of one of the top certifications on the market called Certified Regenerative by Agrino World, which is a
Mhm,
nonprofit. Agrino World's a nonprofit, and they're a really good certifier. And so I got really in depth on that. That's where my soil sciences really helped me. First of all, I'll say that there's a lot of other certifications on the market, right? But regenerative agriculture is so interesting because it's really a farmer led movement. And one of the things that really drives it is that by reducing the inputs, right? So, like less fertilizers, less pest control, agrochemicals, those kind of things. Farmers don't spend as much, right? Because they have fewer inputs. And they also don't work as much often once they've kind of made the transition into this regenerative farming. And so it's giving them more money and less like work kind of thing, and it's bringing the joy back to farming for a lot of people, for a lot of farmers. So it really is kind of a farmer-led movement.
mhm,
And so farmers have been doing this before the certifications kind of came about anyways. And a lot of these are very old techniques of, building soil health and, building the ecosystem, really farming with nature. But, when we come to, and I'm a very strong proponent for certification, third party certification, because when it comes to the mass market, we really have no idea in any other way, unless there is a third party checking things,
mhm,
that a company is really doing what they say they're doing. So unless you have a relationship with a farm or a farmer, yeah, if you know that farmer, you've been to that farm and you trust them and there's trust built there, you wouldn't need a certification. But that's just not today's world. I mean, I've worked with certifications for a while. We've seen bananas that have changed hands, hands of custody 5 times. And so that's, a really long chain of custody for a fresh fruit, right? And
mhm,
so it's a complex world out there, and a lot of things can happen in those changes of hands. And especially if you're thinking about, this is not just one fruit anymore, a lot of these things are complex mixtures and recipes, things like that, where a lot can go wrong in this supply chain. And that's why having a third party certification can really help.
So how do you think the average consumer can, a lot of people unfortunately don't live in an area where they can have a relationship with a farmer and kind of understand. So how do you think the average consumer could best educate themselves, be aware of, and make good choices in those situations? What could they look
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think it is a complex world, and it's really, when it comes to certifications, there are a lot of labels and there's a lot to sift through, and it's confusing.
Mhm,
And that's unfortunate, but it's a lot of times I say that, like with regenerative, like with fair trade, when there's competing labels out there, even though that's kind of uncomfortable because there's confusion, it's also a very high integrity time, because there's a lot of people that are good meaning that are trying to solve the same problem with different kinds of approaches. And in time, the top approaches will come to the top and be the ones that stay on the market. And, there are a lot of retailers, like Whole Foods Market has their own way of vetting certifications, and they say, okay, we want to have regenerative products on our shelves. So what is regenerative? First, they think them for themselves, and they think of like, what are the benchmarks of regenerative? And then they find the certifications that satisfy their definition, basically. So that's one thing a consumer can do, is like if they shop at a certain market, and various retail markets are doing the same kind of thing, where they go, okay, what's going to satisfy our definition? If we say this is regenerative, then what will we allow in the store as a regenerative product? And then we'll only buy those products with those certifications or those qualities. So that's one way of simplifying it for the consumer. Otherwise, yeah, having a relationship with a brand that you really trust, that there's some brands that have been around for a while and they really are transparent and committed to transparency and showing, on all of their materials or websites, here's our farmers, here's a QR code. You can scan the QR code, see our farm, and that link is made for the consumer. So it's really a changing world out there, and the younger generations are very savvy when it comes to this kind of thing. And looking into the facts, like what is this product made from, and what are all these excipients, and where does this come from, and was slave labor involved, or child labor, or something I don't like, and people are digging into these questions, more and more, and it's a desirable trait. Of course, price is also desirable, so that's always the rub. But more and more, this market is really developing and evolving, and I think the certifications will win out, that are the top.
And our ability to have access to this information, and while we do have to sift through it a little bit on our own, because you can't always just type in something and believe what pops up, but our ability to kind of make some of these informed decisions and get the information and then vote with our dollars.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, I think it's like, I think there's a lot of hassles in this world, but us being connected to the things that we're putting in our body, and in our mouth, is probably a good thing, right? Like it's good to have make us have a little hassle, to have to pause for a minute and think about this thing, if you're, and then vote with your dollars in that way.
If we're going to put our time and energy somewhere, that seems like a very logical place to put it. So tell us a little bit about just some of the challenges that you have been facing in your business, maybe currently, or some recent struggles that you've overcome at this point.
Well, let's see. I mean, so there's been kind of a long-term question or struggle, I guess you could call it, in my career. And that is, I've been trying to work on how do you get new plants and plant products to market? Because what's happening out there in the world is that we are standing on the brink of the sixth next extinction, right? So we are having extinction rates at the levels that we haven't seen since the age of dinosaurs.
Wow.
Yeah, it's horrible. And so this biodiversity is being lost, and people don't take a minute to think, oh my God, like this biodiversity that's being lost, this is our reservoir of innovation. This is where everything comes from. And this is where the solutions for the future come from. And so if we don't stop and try to find a way to value this biodiversity, it's just going to keep going away, because how it gets lost is through poor land use, poor land management. A lot of times it's just single species management. They cut down the forest for one tree species and then they pulp the rest, make it into paper. How many species were lost in that process, in that piece of land? Sometimes a species could be lost, or in a very small area of land, because some species are very endemic, very localized. And so through this poor land management, we're losing a lot of things that if we don't quickly find value for them and find a way to save them, then they're going to go away forever, maybe.
Collateral damage.
And so this is a problem, right? And I've always been interested as an ethnobotanist. It's like, oh my gosh, I can see there's so many low-hanging fruits, all these products that could come to market if people just put a little bit of effort into it. And so I've been curious about how this works all of my career, and I've worked in various kind of capacities. So I worked for the public sector like USAID, United Nations, doing development work, and then also for private companies doing formulation, product development, and trying to understand that whole process. And, to be honest, new things come to market in a very haphazard way. There's always the question of well, what do we put our resources into first? Do we develop the supply, or do we develop the market first, or do we develop the science first? And the answer is they all kind of have to be happening at the same time. And so that's been the question. That's been the difficulty in my career. And that's what I'm really focused on now. And through my EBI network, it's brought together a network. I'm hoping to solve this problem. And this is a network of very high positive impact suppliers from the very work that I've told you about, these kind of public contracts that I've had, as an ethnobotanist through my career. And I've gotten to know various suppliers that do a really good job and been in touch with them for, decades. And I really trust and know the work that they're doing. And so working with them on these really high impact ingredients, getting them into market, hoping to get them swapped out. So there's so many poor quality ingredients in the market, and they're the same herbs sometimes, or they're adulterated, but same on the label, it looks the same anyways. So get them, from better sources that have more of a positive impact, a positive CSR impact, and whether it's regenerative or somehow helping biodiversity or local livelihoods. And then we're also have the other big part of this is like an incubator. So through strategic kind of investments and collaboration of strategic product development, we are bringing things to market in a very directed way.
So it kind of sounds like the things that were a struggle for you are actually what you're most excited about and
yeah, that's
and
true.
arising for you at this time. Is there anything, you mentioned different products, but is there anything, one or two in particular, that you're really excited about, or even maybe something that most people, like a household name, to the extent that they would be aware of what that is?
hmm Well, I could tell you a couple that we're working on. There's Madagascar is one of the regions that I is part of my network, and the work there is really important because 90% of the species, the flora and the fauna, and Madagascar is endemic, which means found nowhere else in the world.
Oh, that's
And we're losing it very quickly. So this is one of the most hottest biodiversity hotspots in the world. Right,
Mhm.
it's very important. And so, like, for example, there's one herb there that's Gotu Kola, which is also used in Ayurvedic medicine and Indian medicine. But the Gotu Kola from Madagascar has very high level of active components. So it's different actually than the Indian Gotu Kola, very high quality. Yeah,
Mhm.
just different, very active. And then how we have it set up there, we've been working with local communities, women collectors that are getting a lot of times when you get the development money, the money from collecting going straight to women, that goes exactly where you would hope it to go, right? Like into children and healthcare and feeding the family and that kind of thing. And so that's what we have going on in Madagascar. And that's one of the things that it's really exciting because it's something that has a market out there already. And, there's just lower quality versions in a lot of products, but we can supply a higher quality, really interesting Gotu Kola that has a lot of very positive impact for not only biodiversity, but also the local livelihoods.
So it's protecting this very specific ecosystem. It's bringing a higher quality to the rest of the world, and it's uplifting the communities that you are working with there.
Correct.
So that's really amazing that you can kind of have such an impact on all
Yeah.
three of those really huge components at one time.
And let me add something because I think a lot of people don't understand that, even just giving a livelihood to local collectors or local people who are doing the supply chain work is
Mhm.
really important because the alternative is that they may have to make a living doing the things that they're, just that are there to do, right? And so there's, for example, in Madagascar, you can walk through the forest and you'll see cartloads of charcoal
Mhm.
being taken out of the forest, which basically means these local people are burning down the forest just for charcoal for the stoves, for basically cooking charcoal. And they know that there's a local market for that. Of course, they're getting very little value for this charcoal. And they're cutting down forests, they're burning things because they don't have any other market to
Option.
access, right? So if you're giving them, a different livelihood that where they're saying, okay, now you have to preserve this area and, we'll give you money to collect, these Gotu Kola or, some other plant, then that really provides a reason for saving that area.
Mhm.
Right. And so, and these local people, these poor people really are not bad people. They're just doing what they need to do to
Survive.
survive.
Mhm.
And so I think that's really important for people to understand that, we all have kind of a shared responsibility here, in helping to alleviate poverty and get these biodiverse regions conserved.
Mhm. Is there I mean, that's amazing in and of itself. Is there anything else that you're really excited about in the next 3 to 5 years in the forecast that you see coming
In the
yourself
next
or your
3
business? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm excited for all the products that will come from it. So, it's not only the impact locally, and that's always fun to talk about for me, but it's also, what Gotu Kola products can do for people, right? And the products that they're going into. So I'm getting to see those products being made, right?
Mhm.
And coming to market and tell that story. And I'm excited to do more of that storytelling, really partnering with brands and helping them to tell that really important story. And so there's some of that going on, and I'm excited about that.
We did kind of touch a little bit on AI. We were talking about the wearables and some other ways that it has some really amazing potential to help move this important industry along. But are you using AI currently in your business in any way at this?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us are using it even if we don't even realize we're using it. It's so
Mhm.
integrated now in so many things. But me personally, I'm using it a lot for research.
Mhm.
And I do pay, an AI service for that kind of thing. It really does help to, kind of power my research in when I'm looking at, different literature sources and things like that. So that's probably that. And also, I do some video editing and media type production, that kind of stuff. And there's AI tools there
Mhm.
to do the editing even, So it's, there's every day I feel like there's new things.
Yeah.
But, the I think really most profound thing that I've been learning is the way that people are using it in a science kind of way. And I mentioned earlier about this kind of change in thinking where it's like, yeah, we've seen systems thinking coming for a long time,
Mhm.
but how you study that is kind of difficult sometimes. And when it comes to botanicals, we've never really been in a time where botanicals could stand on their own 2 feet, honestly. We're always getting compared with pharmaceuticals or with foods. And we're always going to lose when we try to explain ourselves in those terms because we're not those things.
Mm.
Botanicals are very special because they have this complexity. And it's a really hard thing to explain in a reductionistic framework. But with AI, there are new models and machine learning. There are new models coming out that are helping us to do that and helping us to develop products that we might not have been so successful with otherwise.
If there could be some component of your business that you wish you could hand over to AI, either to help with a monotonous task or streamline things for you, what do you think that would be?
Boy, that's a difficult question. I mean, I guess the video stuff, because I am doing a lot of, you know, videos and social media, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. If it could really just handle a lot more of that, I'd be happy. And I know there's a lot out there when it comes to, tools, but it's not very smart. You have to really kind of be on top of it to make it, you know, get the thing you need. But
Mhm.
so that's one thing for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think really I'm just mostly held back by my own knowledge, honestly, of what AI can already do because it's so much. I mean, even my iPhone,
Mhm.
it's looking at that. It's like, yeah, this thing can do a lot more than I even know. And, and I even use. So
Right.
it's really taking the time to learn it as a user,
Mhm.
honestly, at this point for me.
Well, it's evolving so quickly. I mean, even though I'm in this
Mhm.
space, there are things that I do differently now than I did 2 weeks ago. Like the pace in which these things are constantly evolving is really breakneck at this point. And so often the output you get is as good as the questions you ask it
Exactly.
and the direction that you give it. Well, I think this has been a really amazing conversation, very enlightening, really going to get people looking at plants in a different way. Is there anything else that we didn't really talk about that you wanted to touch on today?
I don't think so. I think we kind of covered a lot of bases, at least skimmed
Yeah.
along the top of a lot of different
Yes.
topics, right?
One thing I always do like to ask my guest is if you could be born with a God-given talent that you do not have, do you know what that would be and why?
Huh. That's a hard one.
I can tell you while you're thinking, I always ask this because I always wanted to be able to sing and I can't at all.
That was going to be mine. You stole mine.
No, it can be the same. I think there's a bunch of us out there.
That's always the one that I tell people, actually, that, and if you ever drive in my car with me, you'd be probably appalled. I just apologize to people that I just love to sing, and I'll sing out loud,
Yes.
and I'm pretty over it, as far as being embarrassed or whatever. But that would probably be it. It would be great to have, but also I've never been trained or anything like that. So
Yeah.
maybe that would help if I really wanted to do something like
If that was something you felt really passionate about. Well, I do think that there's always an element that you can learn things, but I do feel like with singing,
Yeah.
there's a lot of times you kind of were born with something that you can nurture.
Well, even having like a deep musical ability would be pretty amazing. Like just to be able to pick up any instrument and, do it.
Yeah,
would
I'm
be-
always envious. My middle son is like that a little bit. His brain just works that way. It leaves me in awe quite often. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your vision and your journey with us. I'm going to put all of this information in the show notes and all of your links, but just tell everyone if they wanted to reach out to you or your company in some way, what is the best way for them to find you?
Well, I have a website, which is ethnopharm.com.
Mm-hmm.
And it's farm with a PH, so ethnopharm.com.
Okay.
And there's a blog in there and there's videos. I have, YouTube channel, which is the Ethnobotanical Explorer. And also I'm very active on LinkedIn, which is also, well, it's actually Kerry Hughes on LinkedIn. And so any of those ways. And also like my website has a contact form that you can contact me with. So.
Well, great.
I'm pretty easy to contact.
We'll make sure we put all those links in there so people can reach out to you. And I really appreciate you taking the time. It was such an interesting conversation. And look forward to seeing all these great things on the horizon for you as they come to fruition.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kerry.
All right. Bye.